Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. So, hello and welcome to the Livres Canada Books Export Market webinar, Exporting to Norway. I am Tabitha Hartshop. I am the Livres Canada Books Communications Officer, and I will be facilitating today's Q&A as well as introducing our host. Norway will be the guest of honor at the 2019 Frankfurt Book Fair, and we are pleased to be learning more about the Norwegian market today. Before we get started, there is a chat box on the right-hand side. Please use it if you have any troubleshooting issues that you need help with. Otherwise, the presentation today should take about 60 minutes, and we have set aside time at the end for your questions. We'll be taking questions via the Q&A function in WebEx that is on the right-hand side of your screen. So it's a different chat box. Feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar. We'll be collecting them as they come in, and you can also submit during the Q&A session at the end. You will also be receiving a copy of the presentation following the event, and you can access the recording of today's event on our website in about a week's time. So again, if you encounter any problems or have questions relating to the WebEx platform, you can message me, Tabitha, as the host via the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Now that the technical aspects are over with, I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Kristin Einarsson, Managing Director of the Norwegian Publishers Association. Einarsson has been in the publishing business for more than 40 years. He is also the chair of IPA's Freedom to Publish Committee, the president of the Bjørnson Academy for Literature and Freedom of Expression, and the chair of the board of 2 companies in television distribution. He has previously been CEO of the Norwegian Book Clubs. He has also been the chair of the Norwegian Film Fund and the Norwegian Film Council. So welcome, Kristin, and thank you for joining us. I will now turn the mic over to you so that we can get started.
Kristin Einarsson from Norway in the afternoon of Monday. Glad that you joined us. I will try to guide you through some of the highlights of the Norwegian book market during the next 60 minutes. So let's get started. I intend to cover these 6 parts in my presentation and try to give you some background to each of these 6 chapters. If we start with the market trends and the key figures about the Norwegian market, and let's start with the country. It is not that small country considering how much is covered in land, but in inhabitants we are only 5.3 million. And even if we are so few, we have 3 official languages, which I've shown on the presentation, and about 90% of the population uses bokmål. The first foreign language is English. It's almost 80% that manage to read and understand English. In the publishing business, we have about 230 publishing houses. I'm just mentioning the biggest one here, and I can say that if you pick out the 4 biggest, those are Cappelen Damm, Gyldendal, Aschehoug, and Vigmostad Bjørke, those 4 have about 80% market share. And the biggest of them, Cappelen Damm, has about 33% of the market. If you look at the retail landscape, one thing is striking is the number of bookshops. We have about 550 bookshops, and that means 1 bookshop for every 6,000 inhabitants, and that's probably on the top of the world rating when it comes to the number of brick and mortar bookshops. As you see, there are only few independent. We got 4 big book chains, and the 2 biggest, the that I mentioned first, Arc and Norway, they have a market share of about 60% together. We also have, actually in a small country, 14 internet bookshops, so that gives the publishers quite a lot of opportunity to get through the sales channels. If we look at the major trends at the moment, I will talk a little bit more later on the two most important initiatives this year. The one is the reading campaigns. We have called it the Book Year 2019, and the second part is getting Norwegian literature out into the world, and that's the Guest of Honor project that is in Frankfurt. As in most other markets, we are still in the digital transformation phase, and we have seen almost quite an explosion in the digital audiobooks market during the last 3 years, and it's of course especially the streaming that is the key to the increase in the digital audiobooks sales, or to the digital audiobooks listening. There's a stable and small ebook market. I will talk a little bit more about those, but both these two markets afterwards. In Norway, there are about 7 or 8 publishers who are involved in textbook publishing, or should I rather say teaching learning materials, because the digital part of the learning materials is increasing, and we are having a new curriculum in 2020. We usually have them around every 10th year, and there's going to be a major shift, of course, in 2020, where the digital part is going to be much more important than it used to be. Otherwise, when it comes to the trade market, I will show you figures on this later. There's a slow decline in the book market, both in terms of the reading habits, I will talk about that as well, and also in the turnover for the publishing industry. When we look at the turnover, I just gave you a graph, very historic. It started in 1992 and takes us up to the last year. You can see that in the little box that we had the decrease in the book market in Norway last year of about 6.3%. And if you look at the situation from 1992 and up to 2018, and if you look at the turnover adjusted for the increase in the consumer price index, we are at almost the same turnover as in 1992. We had a phase of increasing turnover up to the end of or up to about 2007, 2008. But after 2008, we have had a decline, as you can see from the graph. I will also talk a little bit more about details of the market later. If you look at the current turnover and how it is distributed in Norway, the bookshops have the major part of it, about 53%. I might add that quite a lot of the Norwegian bookshops also have digital sales, and what they call click and collect has been a success in Norway, meaning that you go on the internet and you do the ordering process, and then you select in which bookstore you want to collect the book if you decide to buy from one of the bigger book chain. And that's been, I think, one of the reasons that the decline in the market share of bookshops is less than in very many other countries. You can also see that the publishers' direct sales is about 12%, and also that a big player in the market is the Art Council and other public institutions. I will talk a little bit about that later. That's something special for Norway. This is a way of from the government side to support the publishing industry. The book clubs have about 8%. There's been a radical decline during the years. If you get back to the early 2000s, book clubs had almost 40% market share in the trade market. If we look at what we are selling, the biggest market share goes to fiction, and then the non-fiction and the textbooks are almost the same. If we have a quick look at the development in the retail price, these are in euros. It probably should have been Canadian dollars, but we didn't have time to transfer it. So you might know the value of the euro, but the average price of both fiction and non-fiction is about 25 euros. I'm now talking about the new titles, and that has been constant from during the last 10 years. So there has been no inflation in the book price. It's almost at the same level during the whole of that period. When we look at the new titles introduced into the market, you will see that there's about 10,000 new titles altogether that are launched into the Norwegian market, and our members have about 60% of that. I must also add that our members have about 80% of the turnover, so their new titles production is a little bit less than their share of the market. When we look at the categories, actually the new titles, the biggest category is literature in other languages, and that is mainly the English language. So there's a lot of import of English literature as well, and this is new titles. The high number of new titles of audiobooks and ebooks reflects that we are still in a process in the Norwegian publishing industry where we are converting a lot of backlist into audiobooks and ebooks. So for the last 3 or 4 years, the number of new titles in audiobooks and ebooks clearly is much higher than it should have been if we had finished the process of converting our backlist into these 2 formats. If we then turn to translation, and which is probably what you are most interested in, it's not strange that we mainly translate from English. 63% is from English, and then it is obviously French and German, and then our neighborhood countries, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, Iceland as well, are represented on the list of what is translated from which languages. If you look at the categories, it is obviously the English part, which is the main driver coming to the translation, and you can see at the categories, interesting enough, it is the fiction for children and young adults that has the highest market share in the number of translated titles, and then in the second place you have the non-fiction adults, and actually in the third place is adult fiction. That was a quick overview. Let's then concentrate on the market for ebooks and audiobooks. If we look at the turnover for the different formats, I have the figures from the first quarter of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019. And what you can see is that paper is losing their market share. The hardcover had a decrease in those 12 months of 12%. Pocket had a decrease of 10%, while audio had an increase of 24%. And the ebook is almost the same. So although the audio is increasing nicely, as you can see, it is not compensating for the fall in the paper the paper formats, hardcover pocket. So overall, we have a decline in the turnover in those 12 months of 7%, and that's the highest figure we have ever had. We used to have an increase in the market until 2.5 years ago. If we look at the ebook market, first of all, like in many of the other non-English markets, ebooks have not turned into be the growth machine that many people thought they would be when we were starting this. The ebooks has started we started publishing Norwegian titles in 2011, and what is something special, I think, in the Norwegian market is that the publishers and the booksellers decided to establish what we call the bokbasen together in 2011. It's not all publishers and all booksellers who are owners of it, but quite a lot of publishers and booksellers owns bokbasen. Bokbasen has all the metadata that you need as a publisher or as a bookseller. It has an infrastructure that allows somebody who wants to start an internet bookstore to just plug in, and you really get all the content you need from there. And also, if you start as a publisher, you get access to all the sales channels through bokbasen. And it's on equal terms, even if you don't own part of bokbasen, you are available to use this tool. And I think this has been very important to make a leveled playing fields for all players in the Norwegian publishing market. But the market is a small one. It's it's about 3% of the trade market turnover. Obviously, it's higher in some of the book groups, but just 3% overall, and not growing very fast either. I must also say that all the formats are available or accessible through the public libraries as well. And as in most countries, it's mainly adult fiction, but as the EPUB 3 format is gaining ground, we also see more of the non-fiction books being introduced as ebooks. The growth curve looks nicely, but these are very small figures, as you understand, when it's only 3% of the market. And you see that in 2011, 12, 13, and 14, the publishing houses were really working on the backlist to get a portfolio of ebooks in the market, and then the number of new releases has fallen to a more, I would say, normal level in the last 3 years. When we look at the average price, it's been increasing. When the market started, it looked like the publishers really were putting prices down to try to get the market to grow, and that they are trying to gain a little bit better prices during the last years. I also must say that the ebook market has an VAT on 25%. I'm going to talk more about that later, but as from July the 1st, this VAT has been scrapped, so we expect the prices on the ebooks to hopefully be reduced about 20% in the second half of this year. I mentioned both the different Norwegian languages, but also the English part of what is offered in Norway, and you can see it's dominated by bokmål, and as I told you earlier, about 90% of the population use bokmål, so this is not a strange figure at all. The audiobooks is another story, and it's different from the ebook. Not that high expectation when the audiobooks started to be launched, but as you remember, that was mainly in the physical format sold in the bookstores. But obviously, when the download came and the streaming services came, everything changed. And as you can see, the latest figures, almost every fourth of the population listens to audiobooks today. And those who listens, they listen on average to 2.2 audiobooks per year. We think that will increase as the streaming increases. In Norway, we have 3 streaming services. They're all owned by publishing houses. They're called Storytel, Fabel, and Ebook.no. And obviously, streaming has become the most important distribution channel for the audiobooks. And this format is also accessible through public libraries. It has been a huge increase, and as you can see, Storytel was the first streaming service getting into action in 2015, and then Fabel launched 2017, and Ebook is not on there, but it was launched in 2018. And as you can see from the new releases, it really in the first boom, when the download sales through net bookshops started in 2010, you can see that there was an increase in the new releases for the first 3 years. But then there was a drop because the sales didn't really take off. But when it was clear that there will be streaming services launched, then again the publishers started to increase the number of new releases, and you can see that in the 4 last years. And not surprising, the physical part is dying, and the download is really thriving. That was what I had to talk about considering these 2 markets, which I was asked to talk about specifically. I will now just give you a picture of the regulatory framework, and I think the key is that there's been a lot of work on shaping policy of using literary policy instruments. We are a small language market. We need to develop it. It is important to promote writing, reading, freedom of expression, and copyright. And this government policy is well functioning, and we really support it in all those parts. We'll go through this. These are known from around the world, most of them. The VAT is a typical one that a lot of countries do to help the market. In Norway, we have a fixed book price situation. I'll talk about that later, as in a lot of other European countries. The Arts Council procurement scheme is something a bit special, I think. I'll talk about this as well. And also perhaps the collective agreements between rights holders. The copyright management through the local RRO is working very well. Talk about that as well. And then there is a lot of other public support and projects, such as Bokåret, the book year 2019 that I just mentioned when we started. So if we look at that, the situation in Norway is that there's no VAT on paper books at all. That has been the situation for 40, 50 years. There was VAT on ebooks and digital audiobooks, but that was the EU has been talking about. Norway is not part of EU, but we are linked to EU anyway. So everything that is done in EU ends up being done in Norway as well. So EU previously this year said it was okay to have lower VAT or remove VAT on ebooks and digital audiobooks. So our government jumped very fast at this, and as from July 1st this year, there's no VAT on no books, any format, anything. And the key arguments for this is to lower the price in a small market. which gives greater access for readers to the books, and it improves the conditions of the publishing industry. We also have a fixed book price agreement. You probably know what that implies. In some countries, there's a law that then binds all the players in the industry to have fixed book prices. That is not the situation in Norway. There is a private law agreement between the Publishers Association and the Booksellers Association. So it's only the members in these two organizations that are bound to the fixed book price agreement. And as I mentioned, about 80% of the turnover in Norway is through our members, which means that there are players on the outside that can work otherwise. But the main principles of the fixed book price agreement is that it is the publishers that decides the price of the new book on publication. Okay, and that fixed price applies until May 1st, the year after publication. However, the retailers can discount up to 12.5% on that fixed price. And that is done because that gives a certain leverage for competition between those who are selling the books. This is obviously not how the competition law of a country wants to have it, so we need to have a law regulation that gives us the possibility to do this. And this is up for revision at the moment, and we are discussing it together with the authors organization, booksellers organization, with the government. What we think this implies in a small market, that it gives them more competition on the diversity, because you can't compete that much on the price. It gives predictable revenues on the bestsellers, which enables publishers to do cross-subsidizing. And it obviously helps the booksellers who otherwise might be a bit outnumbered by a huge corporation using net bookshops. And the authors, and I get back to that, there's a collective agreement with the authors that links their royalties to the fixed price. So it's more predictable revenues for the authors as well. I mentioned the procurement scheme, and that seemed to be something special that we have decided to make here in Norway. It really implies that the government funds the Art Council to buy a certain number of copies of some of the titles published. It's about 600 titles every year, and they buy between 770 and 1,550 copies, and those copies are then distributed to the public libraries. And you might say, what do you obtain with this? You really obtain three of the literature policy goals in one procurement scheme. First of all, you reduces the risk for the publishers. The procurement scheme is such that the Norwegian fiction, they buy all titles that they deem to have the right quality. They do a quality assessment of it, but everything that they think have the right quality will be bought. On the other genres like non-fiction and translations, there are different schemes. There you have to ask for if the Art Council will buy it or not on each title. So it's a bit different, but this is a bit technical. Generally speaking, if you're a publisher, you can continue to work with talented writers even if they don't have the commercial breakthrough on the first title or the second title or the third title or the fourth title. You can also be willing to take more risks on new talents, because you know that you have, if you are sure that you have the right quality, you know that there's a certain number of books that will be bought anyway. And it also gives the small and newly established publishers possibility to get into the competition, even if they don't have bestsellers that can cross-subsidize building a list of new authors. And secondly, this involves better revenues for the authors because as part of the scheme, the publishers had to pay the authors even higher royalty rates for the copies that are bought by the Art Council. And the third part of it is that all these quality titles will be available in all the libraries across the country, at least one title at each place. There are other public support and funding. There's grant schemes, different grant schemes to talented authors that can be awarded. And also there is a lot of grants through the funding from Copinor, the IRRO, which the authors organization organizes. I must also mention, this is not about getting translated titles into Norway, but getting Norwegian literature abroad. NORLA, the organization Norwegian Literature Abroad, is mainly funded by government funds. And also, like the Guest of Honor project is funded by the government, about 80%. The rest is funded by sponsors and the publishing industry. Let's then look at the copyright framework, and if I should have a general speaking, talking generally about copyright, we are quite satisfied with the copyright framework in Norway. There's always something to work on, but generally speaking, it is. I know a little bit about the situation in Canada on the educational part, and I'm glad we have not have that kind of situation. What has happened in Norway when we have been working on the new digital format is that we have been discussing, and we have committed as a publishing industry to help to get the access, especially to the cultural heritage, possible through the digital means, but we want the right holders to be compensated, and actually I must say we have managed to do that during the process. And our RRO, Copinor, is a very strong organization and very helpful, and as you can see, about 218 million kroners, that's about 28 million euros, was distributed to Norwegian and foreign rights holders last year. I mentioned that we have collective agreements with the authors, and as you can see, there's a lot of agreements, and there's not only one with each. There might be a lot. I think we have about 62 collective agreements altogether. Obviously, from the side of the right holders, mainly the authors, but as you also can see, it's also the visual artists and others. They think that this ensures a fair deal for all right holders, and not only a fair deal for those who are selling better in the market. If we, yes, this is what I mentioned. The key element of the collective agreement is actually that it's the same royalty rate to every author. The world-famous author Jo Nesbø gets the same royalty rate as an author who published the first novels that might sell in 200 copies. What this implies for the publishers, is that instead of competing on giving higher royalty rates, the publisher main competition elements is the quality of service that they can offer. And obviously, it is in the editing process and in the selling process. Publisher can use advances as one element to compete with authors, but it's not used much. And the main reason is that there's no agents between publishers and authors in Norway. And obviously, it's difficult to be an agent when the royalty rate is already settled. You have nothing to bargain on that part. Okay, that was a picture of the framework in Norway, and as I said, as a publishers organization, we really support these means, and we are fighting hard all the time to keep them going. Let me talk a little bit about the book buying habits and the reading in Norway. And if we look at some of the key figures, it really shows us that there's a lot of book buying in Norway. Actually, when it both comes to book buying and reading, it's Iceland and Norway, if you look at per capita, which have the highest rate of both book buying and reading. And as you can see that here, and the figures in brackets actually is the last survey. Before that was in 2016. We do survey every second year. So there's not many changes, as you can see. And as you know, more than 80% of the population bought at least one book last year. And this is not learning materials. Those are excluded. And 74% actually did buy at least one book in a brick and mortar bookstore, which we also think is a high figure internationally. And on average, they bought about 10 books each. When we get to the reading, again, these are high figures, and you can see that we managed to increase the number of people who read at least one book a year from the beginning of 2000 and up to today. You can see that there seems to be a declining rate now from when we were on top of the 93%, but still we are at almost 90% who read at least one book a year. And actually, those who read, they read on average 15.5 books yearly. I can also tell you that, no surprise, women read more than men. And people with higher education read more. This is the same in almost every country when I look at key figures in reading. When it gets down to the leisure activities for adults, this is probably also similar from a lot of other countries. What you can see is that books have about 29% of the population reads on an average day. So these are a bit different ways of measuring reading, but I just put it in here because this is measured different in different countries. When we get behind those nice figures, there is something that is disturbing, and it has been developing during the years. If you look at the age group 25 to 39, and you can see that there was an increase. This is the average number of books you read per year. And in that group in 2008, they read on average 17 books a year. It was down in 2016 to just about 6 books. It has increased a little bit last year, but the trend is very obvious. And what you also can see, it seems that over the time it is also starting to hurt in the 40 to 59, because if you see the 4 last surveys, we see obviously a trend in the decline in reading. So this is our main concern at the moment when we are looking at the development of reading in Norway. And when we look at how they compare 2017 reading with what they used to read on average a year for the period before, you can see that about half read about the same, so they are okay. But the problem is that 30% they realize that they read now fewer books than they used to do. And when you look at the reasons for that, probably not surprising. I'm not sure about the Canadian market, but generally in the world-wise, I mean, the social media and the streaming of live pictures is really our main competitor. And if you look at it, don't have time to read, well, one of the reasons you can see on the right-hand side on the screen. I watch more television than before. Well, they are not watching linear television. I'm a chair of 2 television companies, so I know a lot about that. But they are really streaming both what the linear television is offering, but also obviously all the new possibilities like Netflix and HBO and YouTube and so on. Interesting, they also talk about spending more time with family and friends, but and work or study more. But probably, well, we think anyway that the key elements are what is on the right-hand side of the screen. Sorry, that was my fault. I'll get back to that. Sorry about that. Here we are. Okay. When we are looking at, we call them the lost readers. That's not really true because most of them keep on reading, but they read just so much less. The key is this is our main target group. They are leaders. They have a high degree. They have high income, and they used to read much more for pleasure. And the highest share is women. So this is really, we are losing out on our major target group. The good news is that the first good news is really that they acknowledge that they read less. If they hadn't acknowledged it, it might be a problem. They do. And secondly, they really do want to read more. 66% of those who read less in the last poll we had say that they want to read more. And it is really not the non-readers that we are trying to convince. The key is to try to influence our best target group. And we've been talking about the challenges, and actually what they tell us, that they tell us really 3 things. First of all, they need help to get the detox from social medias, from the mobile, from the iPad. They need to be convinced that it is at least as nice to read a book as following a television series. And they need us to work harder to convince them that they should get back to the book. So they are putting a lot of emphasis on us, and what we should do I'll talk about a little bit later. Before I get to that, let me turn to the chapter Selling Rights to Norway. I'm sure that you know this much better than me. I'm sure that most of you are experts on selling rights to different countries, so this might just be silly what I will try to tell you now, but I was asked to do something here, so I will comply to that. General terms, about 45% of what is translated is new fiction for adults, and about 55% is new fiction for children and young adults. So non-fiction is a very small proportion. This adds up to 100, but I mean it shouldn't be, it's a little bit less, but it really tells you that these are the 2 major book genres that you might be able to get into the Norwegian market. And the Norwegian publisher operates like everybody else. They have scouts in the key markets. They are obviously represented at the most important fairs, and they obviously also not only have the scouts, but they have their own network of editors and agents that they trust and that they get offers from. How to succeed, again, I'm sure you know this, but it's really, as I look at it, it's a question of knowing your market. It's to know what sells in the Norwegian market, know a little bit about the publishers list, those you have selected, and obviously we are on a global trend. It's obviously might be local Norwegian trends, but a lot of it are global trends that also hits the Norwegian markets. And when you have done all that, it's really a question of suggesting the right book to the right publisher, and then you have to know the publisher a little bit. So far, it has been difficult to sell humor, glamorous romance, fantasy, sci-fi into Norwegian market, but we have seen many times things changes. So if somebody has good ideas on getting any of these book groups into Norwegian market, you just go ahead. And every publisher in every country is obviously concerned. Is there any possibility of translating grants into a country? Because the translation cost obviously is a major obstacle to get the title into the market. What should you expect in the Norwegian market? Obviously, we don't have the knowledge on what happens in this market, and we should not, according to the competition laws, but some general points I can mention. Quite often there are advances involved, but they are usually not big in a small market. We hear that the royalty often starts at 7.5%, and then higher rates are typically from where there are higher print runs. There are lower royalty on paperbacks, and usually higher royalties on the ebooks and the audiobooks. And quite often in the Norwegian market, because it's a small market, all rights are negotiated for all formats for a title. And the print run might be quite small to start with, often from about 1,200 copies, we have been told. Co-edition are not usual, but some bestsellers you might find that happens. I just wanted to give you, if you're able to see this on your screen, give you just an input on what is the bestseller list in Norway at the moment. Number one on the Norwegian fiction is probably going to be quite high in quite a lot of other countries as well. It's a new title from UNESCO. But number two, which is a translation from English, is actually by author who is half Norwegian, half English, so which will help her. When you look at the other titles, you can see, Lucia Riley, you're well known. I can't almost read it, but you can see it yourself. There's one non-fiction title as well, actually on that list. And when you look at the children fiction, you can see that they have quite a lot of titles on the bestseller list. There's actually 9 titles among the 15 bestsellers at the moment. So again, this is one of the reasons why there is this is the field where there is highest proportion of translations. But you can still study the title. Just give you a glimpse. This was the 2018 titles. Then I've been talking about the translation. Then another way of getting your literature into the Norwegian market is to sell it in the English version. And there's quite a number of titles, as you saw, that are in the Norwegian market in English. Quite a lot of Norwegians read English. And there are really just 2 major players, the one called ST Books and Vigmostad and Bjørke. You can find these on the internet. And they're buying as many others do in the book fairs. Sometimes the import goes through local wholesalers, but quite often the Norwegian import companies have the direct contact with the foreign publishers. and you are interested in English books, but also some Swedish and Danish imported. And in the marketplace, these imported books are obviously not covered by the fixed price agreement, because the publisher here is not a member of the Norwegian PA. And I was talking about Bokbasen with all the megadata, and obviously the imported books are also part of those megadata, so they are accessible for all the sales channels, not only bookstores. Okay, just getting to the end, I just wanted to talk a little bit about main activities we are doing in the Publishing Association for the literature and for the readers. I was talking about our main target group, which is reading less, who wants help to get detox from mobiles and iPads, and our answer as part of this book year 2019 is a campaign we will launch in the beginning of October called Hele Norge leser, the whole of Norway reads, and it says join us. And this is really using all the digital channels to fuel the interest for literature. There will be gaming, there will be competitions, we will have companies competing with each other. We are getting the two major television companies to have their employees to compete. The selling points to the enterprises and to companies is that if your employees read, they get to be better employees. The reading is a facilitator for development and help you building also a culture in your company. So we do a lot of gaming and competition based on companies. We are also launching the region. Norwegian is divided into 11 regions, so we are trying to get regions to compete. And obviously also family and friends can do competition here. I can tell you more about this later after we launched it. We will talk about it at the Frankfurt Book Fair. This is a trial run we are doing this year. We are doing it together with the Booksellers Association, and we're also getting some government fundings. We are funding a part of it ourselves. And our intention is to do this permanently. We obviously have to do some trying and failing, but we think that this is a way of, I almost saying, getting the digital detox through the digital channels. The second of three important activities is obviously the Guest of Honor project in Frankfurt, and I hope that those of you who are going to Frankfurt will have a look at the pavilion and our program and what we are trying to do. What I can say is already that the major success is that there are 450 Norwegian titles transferred into German language this year only, and that's about, I think it's 60% more than it used to be. And there is a lot of activities in Germany all through the years. It's been going on already for a long time. And actually we did, and I think you are the guest honor next year, we did something that no guest honor has done before. We had a big activity on German literature in Norway, in Oslo, 2 months ago, honoring Germany for letting us be a guest of honor, and that was a great success and gave us a lot of attention in Germany. The last one and the last word from me is that I hope that many of you will join us in Lillehammer in Norway, May 28th to May 30th next year. We are the host for the 33rd International Publisher Congress. It's going to be a great program. We are arranging the conference at the same time as a literature festival in Lillehammer is arranged. That's the biggest literature festival in Norway. And we were talking about if we should market a conference saying to publishers, come to us, and you might even risk to meet both authors and readers while you are in Lillehammer town. Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions and answers. So I'd like to turn it back to Jenna.
Yes, so hello. We now open the floor for questions. If you have a question, please go ahead, type it into the Q&A screen on your right. To get us started while you all consider all that lovely information, I have a few questions. So, Kristen, Canada has a similar cold northern climate that lends itself well to crime thrillers. Can you see Canadian crime fiction and thrillers being able to compete with Scandinavian thrillers in the Norwegian market?
You can hear me, yeah. The key is there is a huge interest for crime and thrillers in Norway, and so there is obviously room for more than the Scandinavian titles. I think that so let me speak generally. I always say that the great local literature is the one that travel farthest. So there's not the problem of where it comes from. It is just, is it interesting? Is the story, is the work done by the authors so good, it's so interesting, and is the publisher able to market it in the right way? I think that's possible. So yes, it might be an advantage that you have similar conditions, but I don't think that's really to find the target group, and obviously the target group for crime and thrillers is huge.
Okay, thank you. So we're still thinking about moving into the Norwegian market. What would you recommend as first steps for a new exporter into the market? Is it find an agent? Is it attend the book fair? Is it just reaching out to publishers? What would your first step be if you were reaching into the Norwegian market?
I think my first step was to do what you're doing now, trying to get a grip of the market. It's no use sending a lot of manuscripts to a lot of publishers. I think that you need to start getting the contact information and start getting into discussions with the publisher. If you do it directly or if you do it through an agent, that's really up to you. The agent takes a cut, but has the knowledge and can help you to address the right title to the right publisher. But I mean, that is the key. If you're going on your own, you have to do the hard work yourself. And then when you start networking, you get to meet the publishers at those different locations we have been talking about, like book fairs and other places. But obviously, the direct contact either between agent and publisher or between publisher and publisher is the key.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. We also have a lot of French publishers and French titles in Canada as the nature of our market. Can you just describe a little bit, is the presence of French titles in Norway? Are they translated? Are there French sections in bookstores?
No, you will if you talk about translated titles, you will not see sections based on nationalities. You will see sections based on is it a fiction, is it non-fiction, is it adult, is it children. So you wouldn't see that. that was part of the question. No, concerning the first part of the question, you see from our slides that yes, the French titles are translated, but the market share is much less than the English, and obviously the advantage of publishers in English is that almost all editors do read English, not all editors read French, but the big publishing houses, they have editors and obviously others readers that manage to read the French part of it. Generally speaking, coming from a small country like Norway, what we know that preferably have to either have a brief translation in English or at least a partly translation in English if we really want to get the time to move in the international market.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. You mentioned, we have a question from Anne-Marie. You mentioned that translated foreign fiction genre fiction, like sci-fi and fantasy, is less popular in Norway. So what kind of fiction is more popular?
Well, we were talking about thrillers and crime, which we obviously are, but then there's actually a huge market for what you would call the quality novels. If you look at the market for Norwegian titles, it is really dominated by what we would call quality literature. So, while like romance and erotic novels might be huge in many countries, it's not that huge in Norway. It has been something special. But what I would say crime suspense and what the general novel are the biggest.
All right, and then when it comes to children's titles, is it more independent standalone books, or do you think that series and collections also would do well on the market?
Well, publishers love authors that have a number of books in a series. So when that takes off, that's great. So obviously there's a possibility for that. They don't usually market it as a series from the start. They usually do title by title, but then they can do some compilation later on. But yes, both works, but series is great.
And then Valerie was wondering, are there any surprising academic subjects or areas that might be good for Norwegian market?
I'm getting a bit outside what I feel I can talk about. The academic literature, there's not the members of our organization who are doing it, but I'm not really in it. If you want a better answer to that, I can send an email and then I'll talk to 2 or 3 of our major members in
Okay, that's fair. That's very kind. What else? So we talked about the children's market, and we've touched on the academic market. And when we're looking at novels, and English novels, is it largely classics or short stories that are doing well?
Well, in the market, it's a classical novel is doing the best. Some short stories can be sold, so obviously are sold in the market, but that's usually from authors that are almost a brand name, or internationally or nationally. So it is mainly the novel that travels the most easiest way over to the Norwegian market.
That's very clear, thank you. And then someone was wondering if a title is already translated into a Norwegian language, does it stand a higher chance of being picked up by an editor or an agent, or would they prefer to just have the English or French copy?
Again, I'm on thin ice, but I would think that well, if it's done in Norwegian, obviously that's not a disadvantage. But if it is in English, I think it works well anyway. In French, as I said, there might be a little bit more difficult to get it read. So I think there's probably a difference between if it's published in English or if it's published in French.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have another question about nonfiction. So is there an important nonfiction literature in Norwegian, or is nonfiction most likely to be translated?
Actually, it seems like there's an increase in the interest of nonfiction, and this might have something to do with the fake news and all that. So I would say that it's well worth trying, and well, nonfiction is a huge field, and obviously a nonfiction title that does it very well internationally is easier to also try to get into the Norwegian market. But I think especially nonfiction titles really needs a story to be told to the publisher in Norway. Why should I publish this? What is it with this title that should travel to Norway? It's something that is, I think, generally is needed to have in your mind when you talk to publishers, but and you know this. But I think it's even more important for the nonfiction to get the publisher to be interested.
Thank you. That's a very, very intriguing answer. And all right. We were also wondering, so you mentioned this government purchasing program, which is very interesting. Is there any way to predict what kind of books might be bought year to year? Are there any themes that are generally followed or trends, and how long does the process typically take?
First of all, the procurement scheme is set up not to follow trends, not to follow anything at all. It's the only judgment is on quality, and as we have some little bit more time, I can explain a little bit better how it is done. There's really two systems. The one is what we call an automatical system, and that is for Norwegian fiction, which means that I, as a publisher, I can send 700 copies to the Art Council and say, I've just published this book. I want it to be part of the scheme. I'm sure that the quality is good, so can you distribute it to the libraries and pay me? And they will do. What they have is a quality check. So there is a jury that looks at all those titles who has been presented in that way. And if that jury, and they usually do that in at least about 6 to 8 weeks, if they come back and say, hey, this was not good enough, we recommend that this you should not get paid for this, then the books are already sent to the libraries, and you as a publisher, you don't get any money at all, and you have to pay your author and you have all the cost of it. So that's a risk element in that scheme. All the big publishers, they take that risk. They get some refusal, but that there's more advantage to the total of the portfolio. The small publisher can ask to have it checked before they send any books. They then have to go through a different scheme where it takes some more time, but then the jury will make the judgment before they have to send the book, so they don't lose any money on it if they're not accepted. So that's that scheme, and it's nothing about trend or genre or anything. It's just about quality. The other type of schemes are for non-fiction and translations and others, and there you have to tell the art council that you want them to consider that title, and then the jury will consider the title if it should be bought or not. The problem for that jury is that they have a certain number of titles they can buy each year. So they have not only to make the quality judgment, but they also know that they can't buy more than a certain number of titles that year. So then they have to introduce their measures to look at that. And they might also look at the representation. Gives this title in the non-fiction area something different than the titles we have bought before, should we of that reason buy it? But mainly also they look at quality. So the quality first, and then if they have too many titles, they have to do that kind of consideration. This was complicated. I'm not sure if you understand it.
No, I think we followed. It's a big process, and there's definitely a focus on quality. So going back a bit, we were talking about translated and foreign fiction. Are Norwegian publishers and or readers looking for sort of exoticism in the translated or foreign fiction? Are the more popular books taking place in an environment very different from Norway? Are they more universal stories?
Well, this is always a very difficult question. If you had asked me the same about the Norwegian literature, I would also be very doubtful on how to answer that. I think the key for the publisher is, first of all, do we think that we have a target group in the market? Secondly, is this a title that is naturally a part of my publishing list? And thirdly, is this of a kind of quality that I would like to have on my list? I think those are the major considerations. I think that if a publisher try to select from that kind of criteria you were talking about, it is a very difficult way to compile a publisher's list. And when I talk to publishers, I don't think that they think that much that way. It's really, does this book means anything to anyone? And it could be a very, very classical story, or it can be a very exotic story. We have seen that quite a lot of local stories, what I would call local exotic stories, travel very far. We have seen quite a lot of Norwegian bestsellers abroad are that kind of type. You say, hey, who would buy a book about how you can what's it called? Yes, it logs, isn't it? Logs for your fireplace. How you bundle the logs of your fireplace. I mean, that was a bestseller worldwide, and a bestseller in Norway, more than 100,000 copies. When the publisher launched it, I think they had a print run of 2,000. Nobody really believed in it. So again, I think that's I think that's difficult to do. I think if you as a publisher, if you believe in the story, if you believe either if it's a fiction or non-fiction, if you really believe in it, then it's probably ready to travel.
Well, that sounds like very good advice. We have another question. Which Norwegian book fair should an agent or publisher visit to sell foreign rights to Norwegian publishers? Obviously, a lot of them are attending the Gothenburg Book Fair. Would it be possible to visit offices at another time, or is our fair visits the norm?
Yeah, I understand. Actually, I must say, and I regret to have to say that at the moment we don't have a book fair in Norway. We used to have one in Oslo. That was not much selling of foreign rights. It was much more towards the readers in Norway. So the biggest meeting place are, it is Frankfurt, then it's London, then it's in Gothenburg. And then, obviously, as most of the publishers are located in Oslo, if you visit Oslo, you are able to cover most of the market by personal visits if you manage to get appointments with the publishers. So this is how. I mean, we are talking about two things really. It is how do you get connected the first time. When you are connected, you have all these meeting places and all these emails and all that. But the meeting places, yes, it is the big book fairs, and by turning up in Norway, and also a possibility is to know who are the scouts for the big publishing houses in Norway. For instance, most of them have scouts in New York, and they would probably, I would think, be willing to cover Canada as well. And if you are in touch with them, that's a way of getting in contact with the Norwegian publisher.
Well, that sounds like very good advice and something to think about. And we've got just a few more minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, type them quickly. I have one last question for you. With Norway as this year's guest of honor at Frankfurt, what tip or suggestion do you think Canadian publishers should consider as we prepare for our guest of honor presence in 2020?
Oh yeah, I can actually. I think you should talk to us in November and talked about the people at Norla. I'm actually on the board of Norla as well, so I know very well the Norla plans, but also I'm happy to have meetings with you to talk about it. But if I should say something on what I feel by now, first of all, this is not about 1 week in October. This is about what you do the 2 years before you go to Frankfurt and the years to come after the Frankfurt. So we started planning very early, and the key was to get many translations in 2019, which means for you 2020. So we increased the translation grants for the German language. That was done in Norla to make it easier for the Norwegian publishers to get translations into German. And as I said, that's been a huge success. 450 new titles. I think that's almost a record for a guest of honor country in 1 year. So I think that's one. That's the one point. The second advice would be that you have to do a very careful planning. We decided to hire a project manager who had done this successfully before. So we hired the Icelandic Halldór Guðmundsson to do this for us. I'm originally Icelandic, so I'm a bit biased, but I know him very well. And so if I were Canadian, I would have considered to either hire Halldór Guðmundsson or get him on board as an advisor. He's done it twice. He did it with Iceland in 2011, which was a huge success. We hope that we can say that Norway was a huge success as well. You need a project manager who knows the key people in Germany, preferably speaks German. Halldór does all this. and he knew which communication company we should use. He knew all the journalists. He knew everybody at the Frankfurt Book Fair. He knew everybody at the theaters and the museums and all around in Frankfurt and in Germany, generally speaking. So whatever you do, who you hire and how you work for Germany, you have to do it in the right way, and you have to have a communication bureau based in Germany. I think that's important. The third part is something new. Nobody had done that before. We decided quite early that it was not enough to work with the German publishers, because it's okay to have 450 titles translated, but we wanted to be sold as well. So the new thing was that we made a scheme for the German booksellers. So we have had, I think we have had about 50, 60 key German booksellers visiting Norway, and when we've been talking about the whole project, we have had meetings in Germany. We have cooperated with Börsenverein, which is the German both publishers and booksellers association. So we have been working very hard on the booksellers so that they know what is happening, know the key, are interested in selling the translated Norwegian titles in the market. And I think the last piece of advice is to start very early to plan what happens after Frankfurt. So in the board meetings of NORLA for the last couple of years, there's really been three major items. The first has been the guest of honor project. The second has been the strategy from 2020 and until 2023. And the third has been sort of the running of NORLA day-to-day business. But I will be happy to share anything you want with you afterwards. I think it's important that the next guest of honor can build on all experience from previously. And I must say, we talked to Georgia, who was a year before, and then we had Halden from Iceland 2011, and he had also a lot of information of the experience from other countries. And you can say that there's quite a different picture. I mean, some countries really made this 1 week in October. Some countries made this to be a long-running project. And if you're using all that kind of money, you really can't just say that there was a nice 1 week in October. You must have some other message to tell to those who have funded it.
Well, thank you very much. That was a great answer with a lot of important ideas. And so we have now come to the end of our webinar. So I'd like to thank Kristen for such a comprehensive view of the Norwegian publishing market. I'd also like to thank the Canada Book Fund component of the Government of Canada for financial support for this event. To stay connected with Livres Canada Books, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. And thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.